Blood painted the horizon as Matthew Larson rode across the unforgiving New Mexico territory, his shadow stretching long against the dust of the trail. The year was 1878, and the land was as wild as the men who sought to tame it. 3 days without proper sleep had left his eyes burning, but Matthew refused to stop. He'd promised the folks back in Santa Fe he'd deliver their correspondence to Aztec before week's end, and a man was only as good as his word out here. The setting sun cast the desert in amber hues as Matthew spotted something unusual in the distance. A dark shape, too large to be a coyote but too still to be a traveler, caught his attention. His hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip as he nudged his gelding forward. "Easy, Scout," he murmured, patting the horse's neck as they approached. What Matthew found made his breath catch. A mare, chestnut with a white blaze, lay on her side, breathing laboriously. Her right front leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and dried blood matted her coat. But it wasn't just the horse that stopped Matthew cold. Beside the animal, speaking in hushed, soothing tones, knelt a woman. She didn't look up as he approached, her attention fixed entirely on the injured animal. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she pressed a cloth to a wound on the horse's flank. "Madam," Matthew called out, dismounting, "you need assistance." The woman's head snapped up, and Matthew found himself staring into eyes the color of thunderclouds. Her face was streaked with dirt and what might have been tears, but her expression was hard as flint. "Unless you've got a splint and medical supplies in that saddlebag, I reckon not," she replied, her voice steady despite the strain evident in the tight lines around her mouth. Matthew took in her appearance a riding skirt caked with dust, a blouse that had once been white now stained with sweat and blood, and hair the color of burnished copper escaping from what had once been a neat bun. She wasn't young, maybe 30 or so, with fine lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. "As a matter of fact," he said, reaching for his saddlebag, "I do have some supplies. Name's Matthew Larson." "Beatrice Garrison," she replied without looking up. "Though most folks just call me B." As Matthew knelt beside her, he noticed the practiced way she tended the horse. "You've done this before. My father was a horse breeder," she said simply. "I learned young." Together, they worked in the fading light to splint the mare's broken leg and clean the gash on her flank. It was a bullet wound, Matthew realized, though he didn't comment on it. The question of how this woman and her injured horse had ended up alone in the desert could wait. "She needs shelter," Beatrice said finally, sitting back on her heels, "and better care than I can give her here." Matthew nodded, looking at the darkening sky. "Aztec's still a day's ride from here. There's an old line shack about 2 miles west, not much, but it's got 4 walls and a roof." "We could take her there." Beatrice's eyes met his, assessing. "Why would you help me? You don't know me," Matthew shrugged. "Out here, folks help each other. It's how we survive." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "That hasn't been my experience of late." They fashioned a travois from Matthew's bedroll and some branches, carefully securing the mare to it. Scout wasn't happy about the extra weight, but he was a sturdy horse, and Matthew led him slowly, mindful of the precious cargo he pulled. The line shack was exactly as Matthew remembered, a single room with a stone fireplace, abandoned by whatever ranch had once claimed this territory. He'd stayed there once during a storm and knew it would serve their needs. Getting the mare inside was a challenge, but they managed it. By the time they had her settled on a bed of the old straw that remained in one corner, night had fully descended. "I'll see to a fire," Matthew offered, noting how Beatrice swayed slightly with exhaustion. As the flames took hold in the fireplace, Matthew finally had a chance to really look at his companion. In the firelight, he could see that what he'd taken for weariness in her face was something else entirely, a deep-seated wariness, the look of someone who'd learned to expect the worst from life. "That horse mean a lot to you?" he asked, offering her a strip of jerky from his provisions. Beatrice accepted it with a nod of thanks. "Willow's all I have left," she said simply, and the flat way she said it told Matthew there was much more to the story. "Mind telling me how you two ended up out here? That's a bullet wound on her flank." Beatrice's gaze hardened. You always this curious about strangers, Mr. Larson. Only the ones I find tending wounded horses in the middle of nowhere, he replied evenly. And it's Matthew. She was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and measured. My husband died 6 months ago. Consumption. The bank foreclosed on our ranch outside Durango. I was heading to my cousin's place in Aztec when. She hesitated, then continued more firmly. When some men decided a woman traveling alone was an easy target, they wanted Willow and whatever else they could take. Matthew's jaw tightened. How many? 3. I managed to get a shot off with my Derringer, hit one in the shoulder. They fired back as I rode away. That's when Willow was hit, her hands clenched in her lap. I rode until she couldn't anymore. That's where you found us. Matthew nodded, not pressing for more details. He'd been in the territories long enough to know how dangerous they could be, especially for a lone woman. The fact that she'd fought back and escaped spoke volumes about her character. We'll rest here tonight, he said. In the morning, we'll see if Willow can travel. If not, I'll ride to Aztec and bring back help. Beatrice looked at him with those storm cloud eyes. Why would you do that? Matthew found himself without a ready answer. There was something about this woman, her quiet strength, the dignity with which she faced her troubles that stirred something in him. Let's just say I've been on my own in a tough spot before, he finally replied. Someone helped me then. Seems only right to pass that on. She studied him a moment longer, then gave a slight nod. Thank you. They slept in shifts that night, one always awake to tend the fire and watch over the injured mare. In the pre-dawn light, Matthew woke to find Beatrice kneeling beside Willow, running a gentle hand over the horse's neck. She's running a fever, Beatrice said without turning. The wound's infected. Matthew moved to her side, laying his own palm against the mare's hot flank. I've got some whiskey in my saddlebag, might help clean it out better. For the next hour, they worked together, cleaning the wound with whiskey and repacking it with the last of the clean bandages from Matthew's supplies. Willow tolerated their ministrations with the stoicism of a truly sick animal, which worried Matthew more than if she'd been fighting them. She needs a real veterinarian, he said finally. Beatrice nodded, her face set. If you could make it to Aztec and bring back help. I'll leave as soon as scouts had some rest, Matthew promised, but you'll need food and water while I'm gone. He hesitated. And protection in case those men are still looking for you. He unholstered his revolver and held it out to her. Take this. I've got a rifle in my saddle. Beatrice looked at the gun, then at him, surprise flashing across her face. You'd trust me with your weapon. You don't know me any better than I know you. Matthew smiled slightly. I'm a pretty good judge of character, Mrs. Garrison, and I'd say a woman who'd fight off 3 bandits to protect her horse isn't likely to shoot the man trying to help her. A ghost of a smile touched her lips as she accepted the gun. It's Miss Garrison now, or B like I said, and you'd be right. Matthew left at mid-morning after ensuring Beatrice had enough food, water, and firewood to last a couple of days. As he rode toward Aztec, he found his thoughts returning to the woman he'd left behind. There was something compelling about her quiet strength, the way she'd faced adversity without bending. Aztec was a growing settlement with a proper main street boasting a general store, saloon, and even a small hotel. Matthew headed straight for the livery where he found the owner, a grizzled man named Jenkins, shoeing a mule. Need a wagon and some help, Matthew explained after introducing himself. Found a woman with an injured horse about 15 miles east. Horse took a bullet and can't travel on foot. Jenkins eyed him suspiciously. This woman got a name, Beatrice Garrison, says she's got a cousin in town. Recognition dawned in the older man's eyes. B. Garrison, Joseph Gardner's kin, Matthew nodded, relieved. That would be her cousin, I believe. Jenkins set down his tools immediately. Joseph's place is just north of town. I'll send my boy to fetch him. Meanwhile, let's get that wagon ready. Within 2 hours, Matthew was headed back to the line shack, accompanied by Joseph Gardner and a wagon padded with straw. Joseph, a stocky man in his 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, had been beside himself with worry. Been expecting B for a week now, he explained as they rode. When she didn't show, I feared the worst. She's had a rough go of it since Thomas passed. She mentioned bandits, Matthew said carefully. Joseph's face darkened. Not the first time troubles found her. Thomas wasn't much of a husband, drank too much, gambled away most of what they had. Left her with nothing but debts and that horse. But he shook his head admiringly. That woman's got more grit than most men I know. They reached the line shack by late afternoon. Matthew's heart sank when he saw no smoke coming from the chimney. He quickened Scout's pace, anxiety gnawing at him. He called out as he dismounted. The door swung open, and there she stood, his revolver held confidently in her hand. When she saw him, relief flooded her face, followed quickly by surprise as she noticed Joseph. Joe. Her voice cracked slightly. How did you? Your guardian angel here found me, Joseph said, striding forward to embrace his cousin. Good Lord, you had us worried sick. Matthew hung back, giving them a moment as Joseph fussed over Beatrice, checking her for injuries despite her protests that she was fine. There was something about seeing her with family, seeing the way her shoulders relaxed fractionally, that made Matthew's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. How's Willow? He asked when there was a pause in their reunion. Beatrice's face grew serious. The fever's worse. I've been using cold compresses, but... She trailed off, leading them inside. The mare lay where they'd left her, but her breathing was more labored now, her coat dark with sweat. Joseph knelt beside the animal, examining the wound with practiced hands. She's a fighter, he said finally. Like her owner, but we need to get her to town, to a proper stable where we can treat her better. Getting Willow into the wagon was a delicate process that took all three of them working together. By the time they had her settled, the sun was setting again, and Matthew made the call to camp for the night rather than risk traveling in the dark with the injured horse. As they sat around the fire, eating a simple meal of beans and biscuits that Joseph had brought, Matthew found his gaze continually drawn to Beatrice. In the firelight, with some of the tension eased from her face, he could see the beauty that hardship had temporarily masked, the fine bones of her face, the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet dignity in the way she held herself. Matthew tells me you had some trouble on the trail, Joseph said gently. Beatrice's hand tightened around her tin cup. Nothing I couldn't handle. Those men could still be out there, Matthew pointed out. Would you recognize them if you saw them again? She nodded slowly. One had a scar across his right cheek. Another wore a distinctive silver belt buckle shaped like a longhorn. The third... She hesitated. He was younger, maybe 20, didn't say much. Joseph and Matthew exchanged a look. Sounds like the Harker brothers and their cousin, Joseph said grimly. They've been causing trouble around these parts for months now. Sheriff's been looking for them. Then I'll pay the sheriff a visit when we get to town, Beatrice said firmly. We will, Matthew corrected. The intensity of his statement surprised even himself. They reached Aztec the following afternoon. Joseph's home was a modest but well-maintained ranch house on the outskirts of town, with several outbuildings including a spacious stable. His wife, Martha, a plump, pleasant-faced woman, rushed out to greet them, enveloping Beatrice in a warm embrace. Look at you, nothing but skin and bones, she fussed, leading Beatrice toward the house. We'll have you right as rain in no time. Matthew helped Joseph and the ranch hand carefully move Willow into the stable, where they made her comfortable in a large stall lined with fresh straw. The town's veterinarian, a surprisingly young man named Dr. Peterson, arrived shortly after and tended to the mare's wounds with far more skill and supplies than Matthew and Beatrice had been able to muster in the lined shack. She'll need time and care, the doctor pronounced, but I believe she'll recover. The bullet went clean through, and you did well cleaning the wound initially. Another day without treatment, though. He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. Matthew felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He hadn't realized how invested he'd become in the horse's survival, or perhaps it was the relief he knew Beatrice would feel that mattered most to him. After the doctor left, Matthew lingered in the stable, unsure of his next move. His task was complete. He'd helped Beatrice reach her destination safely. There was no reason for him to stay, yet the thought of riding away left him strangely hollow. Martha says dinner will be ready soon, Beatrice's voice came from behind him. "She insists you join us." Matthew turned to find her standing in the doorway. She'd bathed and changed into a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Her damp hair was loosely braided over one shoulder. "I wouldn't want to impose," he said, suddenly conscious of his trail, dusty appearance. "It's not an imposition, it's the least we can do to thank you." She stepped further into the stable, moving to Willow's stall. "Dr. Peterson says she'll recover, thanks to you." "I just happened along at the right time." Beatrice's gaze was direct, unwavering. "We both know that's not true." "You could have ridden past, most would have." She stroked Willow's neck gently. "You saved her, and me." There was a vulnerability in her admission that touched something deep within Matthew. Before he could respond, Joseph appeared, carrying a basin of water and clean clothes. "Thought you might want to wash up before dinner," he said, setting them down on a nearby bench. "Take your time, Martha's still fussing with the biscuits." Left alone again, Matthew cleaned up as best he could. By the time he joined the others in the house, he felt almost presentable, though still conscious of the patches on his worn shirt and the frayed edges of his collar. The meal was the best Matthew had eaten in months: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables, and biscuits still warm from the oven. The conversation flowed easily, with Joseph and Martha doing most of the talking, filling Beatrice in on town gossip and family news. Matthew was content to listen, observing the way Beatrice gradually relaxed in the company of people who clearly cared for her. It was a side of her he hadn't seen: the slight smile that occasionally touched her lips, the way her eyes softened when Martha mentioned a mutual friend's new baby. After dinner, while Martha and Beatrice cleared the dishes, Joseph invited Matthew onto the porch for a smoke. "What are your plans now?" Joseph asked as they watched the sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. Matthew shrugged. "I was headed to Farmington after delivering mail to the post office here. No particular rush, though." Joseph nodded thoughtfully. "I could use some help around the ranch. My regular hand broke his leg last month, and I'm short-handed." "Just temporary, mind you, but the pay's fair and Martha sets a good table, as you've seen." Matthew hesitated, surprised by the offer and his own immediate desire to accept it. "I appreciate that. Let me think on it overnight." Later, as Matthew prepared to leave for the hotel in town, Beatrice walked him to the door. "Joseph mentioned he offered you work," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "He did. Are you considering it?" Matthew looked at her, trying to read the emotion behind her question. "Would you object if I did?" A slight flush colored her cheeks. "It's not my place to object or approve. It's Joseph's ranch." "That's not what I asked." Her eyes met his, unwavering despite her obvious discomfort. "I wouldn't object." Those three simple words carried more weight than they should have. Matthew nodded, strangely satisfied. "Then I'll see you tomorrow, Miss Garrison." "B," she corrected him. "After all we've been through, I think you've earned the right to use my given name." "B," he agreed, tipping his hat. Until tomorrow. Matthew took the job. What had been intended as a week or two stretched into a month, then two. The work was hard but satisfying: mending fences, breaking horses, driving cattle to new pastures. Joseph was a fair employer and became a friend as well, and then there was Beatrice. She had taken up residence in Joseph and Martha's guest room, helping around the house and gradually regaining her strength. Willow, too, recovered steadily, though she would always have a slight limp. Beatrice spent hours each day with the mare, exercising her gently, rebuilding her trust and confidence. Matthew found himself looking for reasons to be near the stable when Beatrice was there. Their conversations, initially awkward and brief, grew longer and more comfortable. He learned about her life before the daughter of a respected horse breeder who'd lost everything in a fire, her hasty marriage to Thomas Garrison, who had seemed kind at first but revealed a meaner nature after the wedding. In turn, he shared pieces of his own past: his upbringing in Missouri, the loss of his parents to fever when he was 18, his wandering years as he sought a place that felt like home. "And have you found it?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch swing after dinner. The others had gone inside, leaving them alone with the chorus of cicadas and the distant howl of a coyote. "Found what?" A place that feels like home. Matthew considered the question. 2 months ago, he would have said no without hesitation. Now he found himself less certain. Not a place exactly, he said carefully, but I'm beginning to think home might be more about people than location. Beatrice was silent for a long moment. I used to think that. With my father, I felt at home wherever we went after he died. She trailed off, looking out at the darkening landscape. I haven't felt that way in a long time. There was something in her voice, a wistfulness that made Matthew want to reach for her hand. He resisted the impulse. Despite their growing friendship, Beatrice maintained a careful distance. The walls she'd built around herself weren't easily breached, and Matthew respected her too much to push. The situation with the Harker brothers remained unresolved. The sheriff had taken Beatrice's statement and promised to keep an eye out, but the men hadn't been seen in the area since the incident. Matthew worried they might return, especially if they discovered Beatrice had survived and could identify them. His concern proved well-founded sooner than expected. Early one morning, as Matthew was checking fence lines on the far side of the property, he spotted 3 riders approaching from the east. Something about their posture, the deliberate way they surveyed the land, set his instincts on edge. Matthew urged his horse behind a stand of cottonwoods, watching as the men drew closer. One had a distinctive scar across his right cheek. Another wore what looked like a silver belt buckle that caught the morning sun. The Harker brothers. Matthew's mind raced. Beatrice was alone at the stables. Joseph and Martha had gone to town for supplies. If the Harkers reached the ranch house before he could warn her. Taking a chance, he cut across the open pasture, riding hard for the ranch. He reached the stables just as the distant figures crested the hill overlooking the property. "Bee," he called out, dismounting in a rush. She emerged from Willow's stall, alarm crossing her face at his tone. "What is it?" "Harkers, 3 of them coming this way." Matthew grabbed his rifle from its scabbard. "We need to get to the house." Beatrice's face paled, but she moved with decisive calm, grabbing her own small revolver from her saddlebag. "Joseph and Martha in town, it's just us." They hurried to the ranch house, securing doors and windows. Matthew positioned himself at a window with a clear view of the approach, rifle ready. "They might just be passing through," Beatrice said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. "Maybe." Matthew kept his eyes on the approaching riders, "but I don't aim to take chances with your safety." The men slowed as they neared the property, clearly assessing the layout. The one with the scar pointed toward the stable, then the house. They spoke briefly among themselves before continuing forward, their intent now unmistakable. "They're coming," Matthew said grimly. "Stay back from the windows." Beatrice positioned herself at another window, her small revolver steady in her hand. "I won't hide while you face danger on my account." Before Matthew could argue, the lead rider called out, "Hello, the house, we're looking for the owner." Matthew and Beatrice exchanged a look. "What do we do?" she whispered. "Let me handle this," Matthew replied, moving toward the door. "Stay inside." To his surprise and frustration, Beatrice followed him onto the porch, though she remained partially shielded by his body. "Joseph Gardner isn't here," Matthew called back. "I'm the foreman. What's your business?" The man with the scar studied them, his gaze lingering on Beatrice. A slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. "Well, look who we have here, the lady with the fine horse." His eyes shifted to Matthew. "Found yourself a protector, did you?" Beatrice stepped forward, ignoring Matthew's warning glance. "You shot my horse and tried to rob me. The sheriff knows all about it." The youngest of the 3 men shifted uncomfortably in his saddle, but the scarred man merely laughed. "Your word against ours, madam, and there's 3 of us." "And 2 of us," Matthew said evenly, his rifle held casually but ready, "plus the ranch hand who will be back any minute with the sheriff." It was a bluff, but he delivered it with convincing confidence. Doubt flickered across the scarred man's face. He glanced at his companions, then back at the house. "We just came for the horse, that fine chestnut mare. Give us that and we'll be on our way." "That's not happening," Beatrice said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor Matthew could see in her hands. The tension stretched between them, a silent standoff in the morning sun. Matthew knew that if the men decided to rush them, he might get one or two, but not all three before they reached the porch. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the silence. Dirt sprayed up just in front of the lead horse, causing it to rear in alarm. "Next one won't miss," came Joseph's voice from behind the stable. He emerged slowly, rifle raised, with the sheriff beside him, similarly armed. The Harkers found themselves suddenly outgunned. The scarred man's face twisted with fury, but even he could see the odds had turned against them. "This ain't over," he spat, wheeling his horse around. "Actually, it is," the sheriff replied calmly. "Curtis Harker, James Harker, and Billy Jenkins, I'm arresting you for attempted robbery, assault, and outstanding warrants in 3 counties. What followed was brief but intense. Billy, the youngest, surrendered immediately. James Harker made a desperate break for it, but was quickly apprehended when his horse stumbled in a gopher hole. Curtis, the scarred leader, managed to fire a shot that grazed Matthew's arm before the sheriff's bullet found his shoulder, taking him down. By midday, all 3 men were locked in the Aztec jail, awaiting transport to the territorial prison. Matthew's wound was minor, a painful furrow across his upper arm that Martha cleaned and bandaged with practiced efficiency while lecturing him on the foolishness of facing down outlaws. Beatrice was quiet through it all, speaking only when necessary to give her statement to the sheriff. But her eyes rarely left Matthew, watching him with an intensity that made his heart beat faster despite the pain in his arm. That evening, after Joseph and Martha had retired, Matthew found himself alone with Beatrice on the porch. The night was cool, with a blanket of stars scattered across the in-sky sky. For a long while they sat in comfortable silence. "You could have been killed today," Beatrice finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "So could you," he replied. She turned to face him, her eyes bright in the moonlight. "Why did you do it? Why risk your life for me, for my horse?" Matthew considered his answer carefully. Over the past months, something had grown between them, a connection that went beyond friendship, beyond the circumstance of their meeting. He had denied it, even to himself, out of respect for her independence and the walls she'd built to protect herself. But facing death had a way of clarifying things. "Because you matter to me," he said simply. "More than I expected, more than I've let myself admit." Beatrice's breath caught audibly. For a terrible moment, Matthew feared he'd overstepped, destroying the trust they'd built so carefully. Then she reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his. "I keep trying to tell myself that it's too soon, that after Thomas, after everything, I have no business feeling this way." Her voice trembled slightly, "But when I saw Curtis Harker aim at you today, I realized something." Matthew waited, heart hammering, as she gathered her thoughts. "I realized that pain will find us whether we guard against it or not, and that by trying so hard not to be hurt again, I've been keeping out the good along with the bad." Her fingers tightened around his. "I don't want to do that anymore." Matthew turned to face her fully, his free hand coming up to gently touch her cheek. The kiss that followed was tentative at first, a question as much as an answer. But when Beatrice leaned into it, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, the last of Matthew's reservations melted away. When they finally broke apart, Beatrice's eyes were shining, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I thought I was done with new beginnings," she said softly. "But maybe I was wrong." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Matthew's life. His temporary position as Joseph's foreman became permanent, and with it came a small cabin on the property that Joseph had been using for storage. Matthew and Joseph spent evenings fixing it up, making it habitable again. Beatrice continued to heal not just from the ordeal with the Harkers, but from the deeper wounds of her past. She spoke more freely of her father, of the joy she'd found working with horses before her ill-fated marriage had dimmed that light. With Matthew's encouragement, she began helping train some of Joseph's horses, rediscovering her gift for gentling even the most skittish animals. Their courtship was unhurried, respectful of Beatrice's need for independence and Matthew's desire to prove himself worthy of her trust. They rode together, exploring the rugged beauty of the New Mexico landscape. They shared meals and stories and slow, deepening kisses under the vast canopy of stars. By the time autumn painted the cottonwoods gold, Matthew knew with absolute certainty that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with Beatrice Garrison. The question was whether she was ready for such a commitment. He found his answer unexpectedly on a crisp October morning when they rode out to check on a new foal born to one of Joseph's mares. The little colt, spindly-legged and curious, pranced around its mother as they approached. "He's perfect," Beatrice breathed, her face alight with wonder as the foal cautiously approached her outstretched hand. Matthew watched her, struck anew by her beauty, her gentle strength. "He needs a name." "Hope," she said without hesitation. "His name is Hope." Later, as they sat by a small stream eating the lunch Martha had packed for them, Beatrice grew unusually quiet. "Penny for your thoughts," Matthew said, bumping his shoulder gently against hers. She smiled, though there was a hint of nervousness in it. "I was thinking about Willow. About how finding her that day changed everything." "She's come a long way," Matthew agreed, thinking of how the mare now moved with only the slightest hitch in her gait, her coat glossy with health. "We both have." Beatrice turned to face him directly. "Matthew, I need to ask you something." The seriousness in her tone made his heart skip. "Anything?" "The cabin you've been fixing up, are you planning to stay there? For good, I mean." Matthew hesitated, unsure where she was heading. "I'd like to, if there's a reason to." Beatrice took a deep breath. "What if there was?" "A reason, I mean, what if?" She faltered, then straightened her shoulders. "What if I told you I love you and I want to build a life with you? Would that be reason enough?" Joy surged through Matthew so intensely he couldn't speak for a moment. When he found his voice, it was thick with emotion. That would be more than enough. That would be everything." He reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the small object he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. "I've been thinking about asking you the same question." The ring was simple, a small emerald set in silver, purchased on his last trip to Farmington. Nothing fancy, but it reminded him of her eyes when she smiled. "I love you, Beatrice Garrison. I have since I found you with that wounded horse, refusing to give up despite impossible odds." He held out the ring, hope and fear mingled in his heart. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes, but the smile that bloomed on her face was radiant. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." They were married on a bright November day, with Joseph officiating and Martha weeping happily in the front row of the small Aztec church. Willow, adorned with flowers woven into her mane, stood placidly outside alongside Matthew's faithful scout. Their life together was not without challenges. The territories were still wild, the work hard, the winters harsh. But they faced each obstacle together, their bond strengthening with every trial overcome. By the following spring, they had purchased a small plot of land adjoining Joseph's ranch, with plans to build their own home and start a horse breeding operation. Beatrice's knowledge and Matthew's steady work ethic made them a formidable team, and word of their skill with troubled horses spread throughout the county. On the first anniversary of the day they met, Matthew took Beatrice back to the spot where he'd found her with the wounded Willow. A small stream now flowed where there had been only dust before, fed by the heavy winter snows. "It looks different," Beatrice observed, her hand resting comfortably in his. "Almost unrecognizable." "Some things change," Matthew agreed, "and some don't." He turned to face her, still marveling that this remarkable woman had chosen to share her life with him. "I loved you then, even if I didn't know it yet, and I love you now." Beatrice's smile was soft in the golden afternoon light. "And I love you, more than I ever thought possible." She placed his hand gently on her stomach, her eyes shining with a secret joy. "Enough to start building that bigger house we've been talking about." Matthew stared at her, comprehension dawning slowly. "Are you?" She nodded, laughing at his stunned expression. "Doctor. Peterson confirmed it yesterday. By winter, there will be 3 of us." Matthew whooped with joy, lifting her carefully into his arms and spinning her around, his heart so full it felt it might burst. As he set her down, he cradled her face in his hands, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them here. "When I found you that day," he said softly, "I thought I was just helping a stranger in need. I had no idea I was finding my future, my heart." Beatrice leaned into his touch, her eyes reflecting the same wonder he felt. and I thought I was at the end of my rope with nowhere left to turn. She smiled, the shadows of her past visibly receding in the light of their shared joy. I never imagined that my darkest moment would lead me to my greatest happiness. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber, they rode home together, side by side, toward the life they were building, a life neither had dared to dream of before a wounded horse and a chance encounter changed everything. Their daughter, born the following winter during a rare desert snowstorm, had her mother's copper hair and her father's steadfast nature. They named her Willow after the mare who had brought them together, a living reminder that sometimes, from the deepest pain, can come the most unexpected joy. By the time little Willow took her first steps, their ranch was thriving. They specialized in rescuing and rehabilitating abused or injured horses, using Beatrice's gentle methods to restore the animals' trust and confidence. Matthew built a reputation as a fair businessman and skilled horseman in his own right, his quiet strength the perfect complement to Beatrice's intuitive understanding of the animals in their care. Joseph and Martha became grandparents in all but name, doting on little Willow and providing the extended family that both Matthew and Beatrice had lost. Sunday dinners at the Gardner Ranch became a cherished tradition, the table always laden with Martha's cooking and the house filled with laughter. As the years passed, their family grew. A son joined them 2 years after Willow, a sturdy boy they named Joseph Matthew, who inherited his father's thoughtful demeanor and his mother's affinity for horses. 2 years later, they welcomed another daughter, Elizabeth Martha, whose arrival coincided with the expansion of their ranch to include a training facility that drew clients from as far away as Denver. Through it all, Matthew and Beatrice remained each other's foundation partners in work, in parenthood, in life's joys and sorrows. The wounds of their pasts never fully disappeared, but they faded into scars that testified to their resilience rather than their pain. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they watched their children play in the yard of the home they'd built together, Beatrice leaned her head against Matthew's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked softly. "If you hadn't found me that day, or if I'd given up on Willow, or if the Harkers had returned before Joseph arrived." Matthew's arm tightened around her waist. "Sometimes. But then I look at what we've built, our home, our family, our work, and I know that this was always where we were meant to end up." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Together." Beatrice turned in his embrace, her eyes still the color of thunderclouds meeting his with the same directness that had first captivated him. "I used to think pain was something to be endured alone, that asking for help was a weakness. And now," Matthew prompted, though he knew the answer. She smiled, the lines at the corners of her eyes crinkling in the way he loved. "Now I know that the real strength is in allowing yourself to be loved, in trusting someone enough to show them your wounds and letting them help you heal." As the sun set on their 10th year together, painting the New Mexico sky in a riot of color, Matthew and Beatrice stood surrounded by the life they'd built from the ashes of their separate pains, a life richer and more fulfilling than either had dared to hope for, when fate had brought them together on that dusty trail outside Aztec. They had found in each other not just love, but a home that transcended place, a sanctuary built on mutual respect, unwavering support, and the kind of deep understanding that only comes from having weathered life's storms side by side. In the end, it was not just the cowboy who had found a wounded horse, or the woman who had known pain but refused to fall. They had found each other, and in doing so, had discovered that even the deepest wounds could heal with time, care, and the courage to love again.